Okay, buckle up for a wild ride. This is the unbelievable story of two guys who pulled off a counterfeiting scheme so brilliant it landed them a mention in Christophe Rocancourt's book. Even the con artists were impressed. And get this, they managed this impossible feat, something that should have required expert equipment, in the most unlikely place in the world. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel, where we dig into the almost unbelievable truths. Today we're diving deep into a story that's stranger than fiction. Forget your usual tales, because this one involves genuine ingenuity, a daring plan, and fake money that was almost too good. Our story kicks off in 1897 in Philadelphia, USA. Meet Baldwin Bredell and Arthur Taylor, two young men in their mid-20s working at a printing company. These guys weren't just any printers. They were considered the absolute best in their field. Baldwin was the energetic, outspoken, mechanical genius, while Arthur was the quieter, incredibly talented artist, the reason he was hired in the first place. Now, their job wasn't printing books. They were responsible for printing stamps. And as anyone in the know will tell you, after stamps, the most complex and delicate thing to print is banknotes. We're talking about the holy grail of printing. Trying to make fake money isn't just about drawing or printing. It's not even about watermarks or the fancy security features we have today. Back then, the real challenge was the paper. Banknote paper is incredibly secure. You might think, why not just bleach a real bill and print over it? Well, trust me, everyone's thought of that and nobody's really cracked it. The authorities were one step ahead. The ink is so resistant that you can never fully remove it. There's always a ghost of the original design left. It's messy, it's obvious, and you never get a clean blank bill. Then comes William Jacobs. One evening, this cigar salesman with a shady import-export business, let's just say his resume wasn't exactly squeaky clean, invites Arthur and Baldwin to a casual dinner. William had cash to splash, and during that dinner, he pitched them the project of a lifetime: counterfeiting money. He framed it almost as a challenge. Since they were the best in the US, wouldn't it be incredible if they tried to create the perfect fake bill? But he wasn't talking about a lifelong career in crime. The plan was simple. Once the three of them had enough money, they'd stop and retire. Baldwin was immediately hooked. The challenge, the potential for easy money, it all appealed to him. Arthur, unsurprisingly, was much more hesitant. He argued with Baldwin for days, but eventually he was persuaded. William, with his somewhat ill-gotten gains, bought them a graver workshop. This was a smart move. If they were going to be buying equipment and producing something outside the usual channels, they needed a legitimate front. What better cover than their own gravure and printing business? Sure, setting up shop at 25 wasn't easy, but their reputation was so good that they quickly built a clientele. This also conveniently justified all the equipment they needed for their real project. And so, the preparation began. In a move that sounds like the start of a Netflix series, Arthur and Baldwin actually went to Washington to visit the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. They took notes, asked questions, a level of preparation far beyond just looking at a banknote. Back in their workshop, Arthur started drawing, and he was a natural. He could reproduce $100 bills with perfect detail, better than a photocopy. Baldwin, meanwhile, was working on a brilliant machine he'd managed to build. Everything was ready, except for one crucial element: the paper. They tried every mix, every composition, every fiber imaginable to create the right paper, but nothing worked exactly as they wanted. William, who was bankrolling the whole operation, was getting increasingly impatient. It was taking time, it was costing a lot of money, but here's the kicker. The paper the guys were producing was already remarkably good, far superior to the fake bills that were already circulating. William was saying, look, it's good enough. It'll pass. But Baldwin and Arthur were fixated on their goal, to create the masterpiece of their lives, the perfect counterfeit bill. They weren't settling for anything less than 100%. Remember how we talked about bleaching bills? It was a possible solution, and they tried it countless times with $1 bills to keep costs down. The idea was simple: turn a $1 bill into a blank piece of paper, then print whatever you want on it. But as expected, there was always an invisible trace, a faint hint of the original design. It never came out completely blank. And that's when Baldwin had a crazy idea. What if they cut the bills in half? Not lengthwise, not widthwise, but through the thickness. The goal was to create two thinner bills, one with the front and nothing in the middle, and the other with the middle and the back. Because they'd be thinner, they'd be much easier to bleach. Then, all they'd have to do is glue them back together and print whatever they wanted on top. Arthur thought it was impossible, that others had surely tried it, but Baldwin insisted he had a way. He explained his idea, showed Arthur, and incredibly, Baldwin managed to cut a bill in half through its thickness, creating two ultra-thin, undamaged halves. They tried bleaching these thin halves, and it worked perfectly with their usual mixture. Not a trace, not a shadow of the original design remained. Now came the scary part. These half bills would have to go through a printing press. That's how banknotes were printed back then. They worried if the thin paper would be strong enough. They printed the first side, then the second, and it worked. The paper held up. What they printed was a $100 bill. So now they had a $100 bill with a blank back on one half and a blank front with the $100 design on the other. They needed to glue them back together to get a bill of normal thickness with a front and back. They experimented with different glues. The key was to find something that wouldn't become too rigid when it dried. A stiff bill would immediately feel wrong. They finally found the perfect concoction, a mixture of water and rice powder. It was strong, transparent, and didn't harden. They glued the two freshly printed halves together, let them dry, and the next day the verdict was in, a flawless bill. They had taken a $1 bill and turned it into a $100 bill, so perfect that aside from maybe the serial numbers not matching up, a detail we'll get to, it was indistinguishable from a real one, especially since it was made with real banknote paper. They decided to put their creation to the test. They went to a bank with their $100 bill. Now remember the time period and inflation. $100 back then would be worth around $3,500 today. They asked the teller to break the bill, to give them smaller denominations. This was a deliberate move to make the transaction seem more normal. The banker took the $100 bill and examined it thoroughly, as you would with such a large sum. His conclusion? It was a genuine bill. He gave them the smaller bills. And just like that, they had successfully converted a $1 bill into $100 of real currency. They'd even managed to get rid of the fake bill in the process. William Jacobs, meanwhile, was completely in the dark. One day he showed up at the printing shop to find it closed. He figured the two had figured out how to do it and had run off, leaving him high and dry. Obviously, he wasn't going to report it to the police, so he just had to swallow his losses. Fast forward 6 months. A $100 bill arrives at the U.S. Treasury. A bank employee notices that the seal on the bill looks a bit pale, a bit light. He decides to dip it in hot water to see if the color runs, a standard check. And that's when the unbelievable happened. The bill separated. The water and rice powder mixture, their ingenious glue, wasn't water-resistant. Just a bit of warm water and the two halves came apart. The news spread like wildfire. The head of the Secret Service was in a panic. They had no idea how many of these high-quality fakes were in circulation. It could crash the entire economy. Quick side note, this was actually a strategy the Germans considered during wartime, flooding Allied countries with fake currency to destabilize their economies. There are documentaries about the Nazi counterfeit operation, if you're interested. Back to our Secret Service chief. He made the only decision he could. He ordered the immediate recall of all $100 bills in circulation. It was an unprecedented move, involving $26 million, billions in today's money. By pulling all the bills, real and fake, they could start fresh. William Jacobs, of course, heard the news. It was front-page news everywhere. And for him, it meant one thing. Baldwin and Arthur had indeed succeeded in making perfect $100 bills 6 months earlier, had flooded the market, and were now about to get caught. But the story doesn't end there. William rushed back to the printing shop, the one he'd found closed months before. And there he found Baldwin and Arthur working away. Their absence? They'd simply taken a few days off to blow some of their newfound cash down south. They hadn't told William, no text messages in the late 19th century. And when they returned, they hadn't heard from him. so they weren't particularly worried. A heated discussion ensued between the three. They eventually reached a compromise. William wanted them to produce more $100 bills, the new design that was now in circulation. That would be their sole focus. This way, he'd eventually recoup his investment. But this new arrangement was bound to attract attention. Refusing other printing orders, especially with their stellar reputation, would look suspicious. So they did the only thing they could. They drastically increased their prices. We're talking exorbitant rates that no one, not even their most loyal customers, was willing to pay. Meanwhile, the head of the Secret Service wasn't letting the case go. He wanted to know who had created these fakes. He was certain it required professional equipment, so he had all the graver and printing shops in the area under surveillance. Then came a breakthrough. They learned about a printing shop in Philadelphia that had suddenly raised its prices to an insane level. And here's the crucial link. The very first fake bill that had been discovered, the one that separated in water instead of just having the ink run, had originated in Philadelphia. He sent his teams in, and a major investigation began. They quickly connected Baldwin and Arthur to William Jacobs. The police raided the printing shop and arrested all three. During the initial interrogations, the two young printers denied everything. Before the police arrived, they'd managed to hide the printing plates, the key piece of evidence. Without the plates, there was no concrete proof. But Arthur, who had been uneasy about the whole scheme from the beginning, cracked under pressure. He confessed everything, even revealing the location of the plates. Once Arthur confessed, Baldwin followed suit, detailing their entire operation, their techniques. Baldwin even explained his incredible method for splitting bills through their thickness, something no one else in the United States knew how to do. Quick aside, this technique remained a closely guarded secret. Even with everyone knowing how they did it, replicating it successfully proved incredibly difficult. They were held in custody pending their trial. Their lawyer visited them in their shared cell, furious. They had confessed and revealed the location of the plates, their only leverage. The police and even the government were eager to recover the plates, which could have been used to negotiate a lighter sentence. But now, with everything out in the open, their lawyer had no cards left to play. He explained the gravity of their mistake. This news weighed heavily on Baldwin. He spent the entire night thinking. The next morning, he asked to speak to his lawyer. Baldwin asked how long he could delay the trial. The lawyer explained that by using every trick in the book, he might be able to postpone it for a maximum of a year. But it wouldn't change the fact that they'd remain in detention. Baldwin didn't ask for more details. He simply instructed his lawyer to delay the trial as long as possible and asked for a $20 bill to buy things in prison. You've probably guessed it. Baldwin's plan wasn't to buy snacks. He had a much bigger project in mind, counterfeiting from his jail cell. I'll explain the logic behind this seemingly crazy idea in a moment. It wasn't just about making more fake money. Baldwin's mother, a rather imposing woman, visited him every day. Baldwin figured she could discreetly smuggle in some minimal supplies, a few tools, some liquids, hidden in her corset, and that's exactly what they did. At night, Arthur and Baldwin worked on their new counterfeiting operation. One would work while the other kept watch. They alternated nights. Cutting the bills in half was no problem. They'd just take a $1 bill and split it. Bleaching the separated halves was also straightforward. The real challenge was printing. That required specialized equipment, starting with creating a photographic negative. This usually involved bulky equipment. Their solution? They coated the $20 bill from their lawyer with gelatin and left it to dry in the sun all day, taking turns to ensure the shadows from the cell bars didn't interfere. Remember, these guys were geniuses. If they were going to do something, they were going to do it right. Engraving the plate was manageable with the small tools his mother had brought. The press was also improvised. Over several days, his mother managed to smuggle in a small 1.5 kilo block of metal. Using this, they were able to press and re-glue the bills. In a few weeks, they had produced 100 fake $20 bills. These were given to Baldwin's mother, who began circulating them. Once they had a decent amount of this new fake currency, they claimed, was still out there. Remember, their lawyer had said they'd given the police everything, so they had no leverage. This second printing operation was a complete fabrication. The prosecutor was skeptical, thinking it was just a ploy to negotiate a better deal. So, the two prisoners told him to check the banks in Philadelphia, to look at the $20 bills, and see if any of them matched the quality of their previous $100 fakes. The prosecutor did, and bingo, he found the fake $20 bills. They weren't as perfect as the $100, but the quality was undeniable. It was the same good paper, the real paper that had been bleached. When dipped in warm water, they separated. The same technique. You'd think they were in the clear, right? Wrong. There was one tiny detail that would betray them. The original $20 bill they had copied, the one their lawyer had given them, was a newly issued bill. Bills are constantly entering and leaving circulation, and the serial number on that $20 bill indicated it was extremely recent, so recent that it had been printed after Arthur and Baldwin were already in jail. For the prosecutor, this meant one impossible thing. The two best counterfeiters in the country had somehow been producing these high-quality fakes from their prison cell. At their trial, they confessed everything, holding nothing back, from the $100 bill operation to the $20 bills they made in prison. I think the sheer audacity and ingenuity of their story so impressed the courtroom that they received a surprisingly lenient sentence, just 7 years for everything they had done. It's a relatively light sentence, and I suspect that deep down people were somewhat in awe of their audacity. Today, they are considered two of the greatest counterfeiters the world has ever seen. Baldwin died in 1952. After his release, he continued his life as a grava artist. Arthur died much earlier in the 1920s. Apparently, he never recovered from his time in prison. It took a heavy toll on him both mentally and physically. Baldwin, without knowing it, was under police surveillance until his death. The government's biggest fear was that he might one day reveal his secret method of splitting bills to other criminals. They were greatly relieved when he died in 1952, taking his unique knowledge with him. The secret had only ever been shared with a handful of law enforcement officials. I think there's an interesting conclusion to draw from this story. The admiration that many, perhaps even you watching this, might feel for these guys. Maybe even the jury and the judge felt it, which contributed to their lighter sentence. Perhaps we don't truly see it as a violent crime because we don't feel personally victimized. It's not a person they harmed, but an abstract entity, the state, the system, the government. It's a bit like the fascination we have for a Robin Hood figure, stealing from the rich. We don't apply the same moral judgment. Ultimately, they come across as ingenious, resourceful, and anti-establishment figures. If they had stolen that money from ordinary people, I doubt we'd have the same reaction. It's a bit like the feeling you get watching La Casa de Papel when they're printing their own money, a kind of rebellious, stick-it-to-the-man sentiment, without fully considering the wider economic consequences for the entire country. It's not exactly a victimless crime for the average citizen. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Unbelievable True Stories. Let me know what you think in the comments. I always love reading your reactions. Thanks so much for watching.